Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of April, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today is Charles Malet. Welcome to the programme, Charles.
Thank you, Mike.
And by video link from Lebanon is Vanessa Beeley. Now, later in the programme, I'm going to be reporting on young people's attitudes to fighting for the UK in a war and the dead scientist story in the United States. Vanessa is going to be reporting on the post-regime change situation in Syria, as well as the latest from Lebanon. And Charles will have the latest on live facial recognition and bird flu vaccines. But we're going to begin today with Olly Robbins, Sir Oliver Robbins, as he's otherwise known. Until last week, of course, he was Permanent Undersecretary at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and he appeared before the Foreign Affairs Select Committee yesterday to give evidence on the vetting of Peter Mandelson as British Ambassador to Washington. Now, the session was chaired by Dame Emily Thornberry, and it was convened after The Guardian reported contradictions, they were suggesting contradictions anyway, in Robbins' earlier written evidence that he gave on the 16th of September last year, and his oral evidence that he gave on the 3rd of November last year, and the latter that was given alongside Cabinet Secretary Sir Chris Wormold. Now, let's just have a brief listen to his opening remarks.
So thank you for the opportunity to set things out. I won't go on at length, but I think there are three important framing points I need to make. Firstly, as you say, when I walked into post as Permanent Undersecretary on the 20th of January last year, I wasn't walking into a vacuum. I arrived to a situation in which a due diligence report had been undertaken into Mandelson by the Cabinet Office, assessing the reputational risks and his fitness for office. The Prime Minister had then presumably taken advice on his fitness for office. The name had been submitted to the King as Minister's recommendation. The Prime Minister had made an announcement that Mandelson was his nominee without caveats. The British government had sought agrément, the formal diplomatic process for a host government accepting a nominee from the US government, and that had been obtained before I arrived in post. He'd been given access to the building. He'd been given access to low classification IT. And from time to time, for case-specific issues, he was being given access to higher classification briefing. So I'm afraid I walked into a situation in which there was already a very, very strong expectation, and you would have seen the papers released already under the humble address, that coming from Number 10, that he needed to be in post and in America as quickly as humanly possible.
So that was his opening gambit, and as previously reported on this programme, Mandelson's appointment had already been announced when Robbins took up the job, so we've got to wonder why he's carrying the can for it right now. He described a sustained expectation from Downing Street that the new ambassador would be deployed to Washington, as he's just said, as rapidly as possible. And then, under questioning from Thornberry on the source of the pressure, he identified Number 10's private office as the channel he was most aware of. He was actually asked for more specifics, and he effectively refused to give them by saying that he didn't know. I didn't find that terribly credible, but anyway, that was his position. He set out a dispute between the Cabinet Office and the FCDO over whether Mandelson required developed vetting at all. And according to his account, the Cabinet Office initially took the position that no vetting was necessary and that the FCDO had to insist the process be carried out. But let's listen to another brief exchange from the meeting.
Are you saying that UKSV didn't recommend that DV be denied? Are you saying that?
No, I'm trying to tell the committee what I was briefed in that meeting.
You're saying borderline.
I was told it was a borderline case and that they lent against.
Borderline and lent against. And that's different, is it, to recommend that DV be denied?
I can only tell you the words I heard.
Said to you were not aware that this box had a tick in it, the red box saying clearance denied.
Until the government published it, I've never seen a sheet like that, Sir John.
But even if you hadn't seen the sheet, you didn't know that the clear recommendation, final decision of UKSV was clearance denied.
I was told that it was a borderline case and that UKSV were leaning against granting clearance.
Now, Charles, this comes across to me as real Sir Humphrey Appleby stuff for anybody that knows Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, because he's not answering the questions. He's absolutely obfuscating, and you wouldn't expect any different from a politician, but he's supposed to be a civil servant.
Yes, but there does seem to be a code. I mean, first of all, it's very obvious that nothing was his fault, and to some extent, a certain amount of it can't have been his fault. But equally, the code seems to be that you absolutely don't chuck somebody else into the mess in order that it doesn't blow back on you. So he wouldn't have got to such a position, I don't think, by being able to, or rather by not being able to wriggle or dance his way out of what appears to be a lie that entraps him.
Absolutely. Now, Liberal Democrat MP Richard Ford asked Robbins about a Sky News report that Morgan McSweeney, then the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, had telephoned Robbins' predecessor, Sir Phil Barton, and instructed him to just effing approve it. Robbins said he did not recall Barton using these words, but confirmed that Barton's handover had left him with a clear impression of pressure and dismissiveness from Downing Street towards the vetting process. Ford also raised an email that was dated the 20th of December 2024 from the number 10 Private Secretary for Foreign Affairs to Mandelson, referring to forms that McSweeney had mentioned to him earlier that day. And the chair clarified that these were conflict of interest documents. Now, McSweeney, the issue of McSweeney and the fact that McSweeney had such a close relationship with Mandelson was brought up during the thing, but Robbins wouldn't admit that was the source of the pressure. But anyway, this goes on. Prime Minister's questions has just happened. We haven't seen it because we were preparing for the news, but undoubtedly this was being discussed.
Yeah, I feel certain there'll be a lot to come out later, yes.
Yes, Vanessa, let me welcome you to the programme, and let's move over to the Middle East then. And what's the latest on Lebanon?
Yeah, well, Lebanon, it still has another 4 days before the end of the ceasefire. Of course, the Iranian-Israeli-US ceasefire has ended. Trump has allegedly extended it, while, of course, maintaining the blockade on Iranian ships and goods being transported from Iranian ports. But, of course, also unsurprisingly, Israel has not adhered to the ceasefire whatsoever. And in fact, we've seen wholesale destruction in the south beyond the 8-kilometer buffer zone that they were claiming they were trying to create last week. So let's have a look at this article from The Cradle, which says Israel claims ownership of the Lebanese gas field at Qana after establishing Gaza-style yellow line near border. And if we have a look at the next slide, which shows the map from the Zionist spokesperson, he regularly puts these posts out on X. This has been very badly translated from the Arabic, but it shows effectively the area in red that Israel is now attempting to not only occupy, but to destroy entirely. So ethnically cleansing this whole area, very similar to Gaza, where, of course, entire neighborhoods were detonated and destroyed. And that is effectively what has been going on. And if you look at this map, you'll see to the left of it. So here they're basically informing, I think it's 70 villages, which include Christian and Sunni Muslim alongside the Shia Muslim communities in this area, to evacuate basically north of the Litani River again. But if you look to the left, you'll see the two red lines that stretch out into the sea. And if we have a look at the next post, so this is from a Lebanese analyst on X, what he's basically saying is this shows a map of the Qana gas exploration areas. 98%, he says, in a later post of the area in red, has seen the majority of the attacks with white phosphorus. So again, very clear that Israel is trying to effectively ethnically cleanse this area. And what he's saying is that with Israel extending this into the maritime territory, into the sea territory, they're trying to take control of Block 8 in the Qana energy block there. Block 9 has been shown to be a dry oil well. So effectively, they're now trying to seize the exploration of Block 8. So unsurprisingly, Israel is trying to take control of both water and gas resources in Lebanon. And then when I talk about wholesale destruction, this following video, for some reason, hasn't uploaded in brilliant quality, but this was taken by a Zionist drone of Bint Jabal, which is a city that I spoke about last week, where Israel has been trying to seize the entire city. Instead, what they've done now is to completely eradicate it, basically. And very much also, I heard today, this is part of a Hannibal doctrine, because during the war with the Lebanese resistance, before this current ceasefire, there were Israeli soldiers presumed captured. So, of course, what they've done is to destroy the entire area, including to kill potentially those Israeli military captives, to ensure that they're not interrogated again, something that we saw after October the 7th with the massacre of Israeli civilians by the Israeli forces. Just devastation in the south, and that's across the south in all towns and villages, including, as I said, many Christian towns. And a very recent report, this is from the Times of Israel, the IOF confirmed the photo of a soldier smashing a Jesus statue in Lebanon, saying it's genuine and, of course, vowing action, which, of course, is damage limitation. But let's have a look at the image. So this is a Zionist soldier attacking a statue of Jesus in one of the Christian towns in the south. Let's just have a look at a close-up, because personally I find this extremely disturbing. And then Netanyahu basically went on X to try and again limit the damage. He basically, it's noted that he doesn't mention the name of Jesus. He simply says it was wrong of his forces to desecrate a statue in this way. But he also says that Christians are being slaughtered in Syria and Lebanon by Muslims, which of course is entirely untrue. In fact, throughout history in Lebanon, it is the Christian proxy forces of Israel that have slaughtered Palestinians and Lebanese inside Lebanon. And of course, it is Al-Qaeda, again, a proxy of Israel and Syria, that have been responsible and continue to be responsible for the slaughter of Christians. But he also goes on to say that Christians thrive in Israel. The population and standard of living is growing, and Israel is the only place apparently in the Middle East that adheres to freedom of worship for all. So let's see how true that is. This was one response to his post on X. You wrote a whole post about Jesus, but couldn't even name him. You destroyed churches and mosques in both Palestine and Lebanon, and I would also say in Syria. You spit on Christians and kill everyone regardless of their faith. You desecrated religious symbols everywhere. Your post is damage control, as I said. But then if we have a look, this is a report from 2025 in The Guardian, talking about Christian communities in Israel. They're trying to make it unbearable. Jerusalem Christians faced Easter under Israeli crackdown, and many people have seen the videos of particularly Orthodox Jews spitting on Christian worshippers in various areas of the occupied territories. And this is from 2022. Jerusalem Christians, we shrunk from 20% to 2% of the population due to Israeli violence. And interesting that in Iran, we have seen the Jewish communities come out in support of the Iranians against the war and aggression from the US and from Israel. And then finally, I just wanted to remind everyone that Israel effectively provided weapons, funding, and hospital support for the terrorists, that Al-Qaeda terrorists and affiliates in Syria, prior to them being brought to power by Israel and the entire US-UK-led alliance of regime change. And meanwhile, those Al-Qaeda elements that are now ruling over Syria have been carrying out suicide bombings and persecution of all ethnic minorities, but also including Christians. So just to show the rank hypocrisy of Netanyahu's statement. And this article that I wrote back in 2025 in UK Column talks about one of the terrorist suicide bombings that was done under the control of Jolani.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. What is the situation today? That you're saying that the ceasefire was never really adhered to. It's got another couple of days to run. What are people's expectations over the next couple of weeks?
That war will start again. There have been assassinations today, bombings today, particularly in Somor, another town that I visited in West Becker and wrote about for UK Column. There was a young man assassinated there. So I think really the resistance here is waiting to see what happens with Iran. If the ceasefire holds there, then they will try to maintain some kind of ceasefire here. But beyond that, if Iran picks up the war again or is under attack, as it is, of course, its boats are under attack, then we will see it begin again here.
Thanks for that. Charles, let's move over to you then. And here back to the UK and the issue of live facial recognition.
Yeah, and not exactly to be described as a good news story, although perhaps an opportunity to apply pressure. This refers to a judgment made by the High Court, or at least a judgment based on a judicial review that was brought by the claimants Sean Thompson and Silky Carlo of Big Brother Watch. Now, among their concerns, as it was written up in the judgment, the claimants put it that live facial recognition can be deployed without the consent or knowledge of the persons involved on a large scale or in crowded locations. The overwhelming majority of persons whose facial biometrics are captured and processed are not suspected of any wrongdoing and are not otherwise persons for whom the police are looking. There is a risk of false identification, which may result in intrusive questioning to establish identity. I'll go on to qualify that exactly with relation to what happened to Sean Thompson himself. But before I do, we will listen to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service, Mark Rowley, explaining in his words what has happened.
This legal judgment is a significant and important victory for public safety. It confirms that the Met is right and acting lawfully to use the best modern technology to reduce crime and keep pace with the evolving threats that we face. Live facial recognition works, and it's one of the biggest breakthroughs for policing. It's actively removing thousands of dangerous and wanted offenders from London streets, including individuals who pose a serious and ongoing threat to our communities, including those wanted for the most serious offences such as rape, domestic violence and child sex offences. Our data shows that the technology is highly accurate and fair, and we've already made more than 2,100 arrests using it. Last year alone, more than 3 million faces walked past the cameras, resulting in only 12 false alerts, none of which led to an arrest. Crucially, every alert is reviewed by trained officers before any action is taken.
So, given what I've just read out concerning the concerns of the claimants, he's very deliberately ignoring any of the issues with it and instead simply referring to the way in which the Met Police has used it and apparently intends to use it. And this is a critical part of it, which again I'll come on to describe. But we'll just look at another statement put out about this from Big Brother Watch. This is effectively a sort of question and answer session on it and what it is in particular that we should be concerned about. And they set it out, I think, very concisely. It's a fundamental principle that individuals should not have to identify themselves to the police unless they are suspected of criminal behaviour. LFR, live facial recognition, reverses this protection by indiscriminately subjecting innocent members of the public to mass identity checks. And this is exactly what it is that Mark Rowley is not going to address. Now, he does go on to talk about his view, the way that the court have passed judgment on the way the Met Police use LFR.
Today, the court has been clear. Our use of live facial recognition is lawful and supported by our strong safeguards. the judgment confirms that we are deploying the technology responsibly and with care. It shows that fairness, accuracy and accountability were part of our design from the beginning. It also recognises that we have strong oversight and strong safeguards in place. These include checks to ensure it's proportionate and that people's rights, such as the rights to privacy and freedom of expression, are protected in a way that does not breach the Human Rights Act.
And in referring to the Human Rights Act, he absolutely exposes the critical mismatch really between what the claimants object to and what the court has looked at. And in the judgment from the judicial review, they specifically say that they're not concerned with the merits or the demerits of the use of LFR by the Met, but only whether the Met is acting within the limits of its legal powers. And it is almost as though this system is absolutely set up to predicate or set the conditions for this sort of result. Now, from the judgment, the claimants contend firstly that the policy violates Article 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights and allows for interference with the right to respect for private and family life, and then the use of LFR is not in accordance with the law. And secondly, they contend the policy violates Articles 10 and 11 in that it allows restrictions upon freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. Obviously, Rowley has just there said that that is not the case. And he then further manipulates what he describes as public support in terms of approval for LFR. So we'll just listen to him talking about that.
I would also add that the public are firmly on our side. Around 80% of Londoners support the use of live facial recognition to keep them safe. Yet a small number of campaign groups continue to argue that the police should be prevented from using such proven tools that help us catch paedophiles, rapists, violent criminals, and those wanted by the courts. Their position is increasingly out of step with both public opinion and the realities of modern communities and modern policing.
So very cynically ignoring the views of people who've actually looked into it, thought about it, and are aware of the dangers. And then we'll just go on to have a quick look at his speculation about how technology is harnessed appropriately.
This isn't secret surveillance. Deployments are clearly signposted, highly visible, and the technology never replaces professional judgment. Live facial recognition technology is a key part of our determination to accelerate the use of smart policing tools to better protect London's communities and also to help us make the best use of our limited resources.
Now, with regard to whether technology does or doesn't influence the outcomes, the instance concerning Sean Thompson was that he was misidentified. And ironically, he was mistaken for his brother, and his brother was the subject of the scrutiny because he had in fact attacked Sean. Now, he was described as having felt anger and distress as a result of the way in which he was treated. And Mark Rowley has in effect completely ignored this. But the point to draw out of it is that the system, the computer, in effect, influenced the decision that was made on the ground by those police who would not otherwise have fallen into that trap. So it looks very much like a slippery slope. And I think it does also beg the question with regard to a recent Telegraph article, is this going to help or hinder stories like this, police being too busy to arrest paedophiles? The suggestion that technology is the answer to everything is absolutely not reinforced by what we see here. So we will absolutely be following up on this. And as I say, it would be really an encouragement to do what you can to resist the further deployment of LFR in any way that you can.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you for that. Now, if you like what the UK Column does, we do need your ongoing support. You can find out how you can do that at the UK Column website, but do pick up a copy of the column if you haven't, our new magazine, if you haven't done that yet. Issue 1 is out and available. And everybody that's bought it so far, the feedback has been fantastic. So thank you very much for that. If you would like to join us as a member, that massively helps us as well. But if you can't support us financially, please do share this program and any other that you see that you like, because that helps us beat the censorship. Now, in September, of course, we are having our 20th anniversary get together. We've produced a little video to introduce that.
UK Column is 20. For 20 years, we've been the antidote to mainstream propaganda. The most established, online alternative news organisation in Britain. Join us as we mark this momentous occasion, celebrating everything UK Columns achieved in the beautiful location of Plymouth. We have 3 days of amazing speakers, presentations and stories, plus music, fun, friendship and prize giving. We would love you to be there. Grab your ticket at the UK Column shop and be part of this wonderful anniversary weekend.
Do you want to go on with this and mention Jonathan Marshall?
I do, yes, absolutely I do. Jonathan Marshall is booked to join us for the whole weekend, in actual fact, and we are very pleased with that because he will be flying his Falcons at the venue, and he is a terrific speaker, a very inspirational chap, and there's an interview on the website, so you can catch up with what he's all about. So please do go and have a look at that.
Brilliant. Now, tonight at 7 p.m, Jerem is speaking to Mark MacDonald on navigating ideological extremism. Join him for 7 at that. And then Carl is going to be looking at the future of Taiwan at 9. 1 p.m. tomorrow, Military Matters episode 5 goes out. Charles?
It does, yeah. We're extending the series. I mean, it's very timely, this, really, because, of course, a lot of what we are discussing concerns the apparent refusal of the United Kingdom to join in the wider war, but, of course, in actual fact, being drawn in very much, and how that impacts on those either serving or potentially serving in the armed forces.
Okay, let's move on then to bird flu.
Bird flu, yes. And if you are groaning inwardly, it is indeed a case of, here we go again, an absolute onslaught, really, of propaganda led, as is so often the case, by the BBC, who have been gleefully announcing just this morning that a vaccine trial against a potential pandemic strain begins. And of course, those are critical words, the idea that there is a pandemic strain. Now, from this article written by their health editor, it said that it's impossible to know if H5N1 will be the strain that causes the next flu pandemic. It's absolute determination that there will be a next flu pandemic, which absolutely makes one wonder whether such a thing is possible at all. There have been other experimental vaccines. This is all sounding very familiar. And indeed, the editor took part in a trial in Oxford in 2006. But the jab, although safe, did not prove to be very effective. So all the key phrases there. And indeed, this one, there have been around 1,000 confirmed human cases reported to the World Health Organization since 2003, and nearly half of those proved fatal. So in other words, very, very, very few. Now, in terms of who is running what, we look to the NIHR, which is responsible for this trial. Now, interestingly, this morning, going to see whether you could be a part of their research, that page wasn't actually working, but their headline about the vaccine trial launching is indeed up and running. And if you have sharp eyes, you'll notice that the lady being jabbed on the right there is the same one standing with her chickens on the BBC page. So absolutely joined up messaging, which is why you very specifically use the word propaganda. Now, from this NIHR page, one of the critical parts to observe is that the study is also supported by Moderna's collaboration with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. And it will not surprise you to learn that just a couple of years ago, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Wellcome Trust pledged $300 million to this organization to fight the COVID-19 and combat the threat of, here we go again, future pandemics. Now, there are too many conflicts of interest to list, but this is exactly the same pattern on the animals or the zoonotic side, an apparent threat. And of course, remember that Bill Gates himself is prone to speaking enthusiastically about his 20-fold return on investment from vaccines. Now, all of this is predicated on the threat and the spectre of the next pandemic. And it's the World Health Organization who decides whether or not this is actually a thing. Now, we go to their website to look at what they say about this, as well as being mindful of the fact that, of course, it's entirely problematic to gift an organization such centralized control of this sort of thing. They say that humans can be infected with avian, swine, and other influenza viruses. They also go on to say that currently circulating zoonotic influenza viruses have not demonstrated sustained human-to-human transmission. And yet this is exactly what the rollout of a vaccine trial is predicated on. So therefore, we'll go to the United Kingdom and have a look to see what they say. And this is from the UK Health Security Agency with regard to human cases of avian flu being detected in England. Since 2021, there have been 7 detections, and 2 of which, this is obviously all by PCR test. In the other 5 detections, all individuals were asymptomatic. So that word is bound to be making a comeback sometime soon. And just by comparison, admittedly, a rather ridiculous comparison, but one nonetheless, since so much of this is based on statistics. Apparently, the 1st of August is the most accident-prone day of the year in the United Kingdom, and more than 1,000 people report in with claims to the National Accident Helpline on the 1st of August. It does rather put things in perspective, albeit a silly perspective. Now, a key building block between, in terms of the spread, is that supposedly that exists between animal species. And of course, this can only be validated by the misuse of the PCR test, which, just to remind you, may not predict or determine illness. It may not determine the source of illness, or indeed that anything may pass from one organism to another, or in this instance, that birds can be described as the origin of anything which may subsequently be found. But anyway, back to the statistics. This year so far, we have 1 case of animal transmission. 1 poor otter somewhere up in Scotland has been lanced with a PCR test and found guilty. And therefore, everybody else suffers the consequences, at least insofar as propaganda is concerned. Now, as to the other issue running concurrently with this, of course, vaccination for poultry themselves. Now, why? How is it that this is justified? Well, annual outbreaks cost the UK government and industry up to £174 million each year. Probably a lot more than that, actually. The disease has significantly impacted both captive and wild birds globally since, what a coincidence, 2020. Now, of course, that is because of the approach to what is described as bird flu, which is found by, in effect, a fraudulent scientific mechanism, and the birds are killed approximately at a rate of 1 per positive test to 48,000 birds that have absolutely nothing wrong with them. And I'm not suggesting by saying that the tested bird has anything wrong with it. Either in terms of the latest situation as it's set out by the government, this is for England, but they do include statistics from across the United Kingdom. Since the current outbreak as it's described, which began in 2025, has started, in actual fact, only 100 positive cases have been found. So why is it that several million birds are now dead, you might be asking? Now, what about humans? Before we do that, we look at the regulations concerning vaccination. And this is actually a key part of it, because, of course, Statutory Instrument 2703 from 2006 specifically declares that no person shall vaccinate any bird against avian influenza except where required or licensed by the Secretary of State. And yet we absolutely are in a position where this is being done. So in effect, it has been justified through a sort of a backdoor qualification. And if you're wondering, well, why is it that birds would get ill in the first place? I mean, how is this liable to happen? And just as an example, this is a fairly standard commercial poultry shed in the United Kingdom. And let's go back to where we started, because, of course, humans kept in the same conditions are most likely to have similar results. This is BBC News from this morning, in which they had a very lengthy piece with the chief executive of McDonald's, of all places, who was given ample opportunity to talk up the apparent health benefits of eating their products. So whilst it might seem superficially unrelated, absolutely it isn't. And of course, this is yet another opportunity for the spectre of as yet undefined threat to use the rollout of very profitable mRNA vaccine technology. We will keep our eyes on this.
Absolutely. Well, let's head over to the United States then, because almost a dozen scientists related to you notice almost a dozen, related to nuclear and space defense programs tied to NASA, SpaceX, and Blue Origin are dead or missing in cases as far back as 2022. And apparently this has gone largely unnoticed by authorities and the public until now. So let's just bring it on screen. So that's according to Fortune, in a story which began on social media and has migrated widely onto mainstream media. And then on Monday, the top House Oversight Committee Republican, James Comer, said the growing group of missing or dead scientists was a national security threat that lawmakers were taking seriously. Except the available evidence doesn't support the claim that anything extraordinary is happening. The pattern looks like an apparent cluster, but it absolutely falls apart under any serious scrutiny. Now, the list making the rounds contains 11 names spanning 2022 to early 2026 across the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at Los Alamos, MIT, Caltech, Kansas City National Security Campus, and one retired Air Force Major General. So the question is, what's unusual about that? People die all the time, and it's not exactly large numbers, bearing in mind we're talking about 5 years or something like that, right? So there's no substantive links between the people on the list, and as I say, the timescale isn't a matter of days or weeks; it's a matter of years. Having said that, several of the disappearances do share a profile. They left on foot. They took a handgun with them. Belongings and phones are left behind. And in some cases, the phones were factory reset. But it could be argued that this is more consistent with suicide or intentional disappearance rather than foreign intelligence abduction, because, of course, this is what is being framed around this. This is being blamed on potentially Russia, China, or Iran. It's the usual suspects once again. But just as one example, 34-year-old scientist Amy Eskridge is confirmed to have died by suicide in 2022 in Alabama. Now, Trump, for his part, told reporters last Thursday that he hopes it's random, but we're going to know in the next week and a half. Pretty serious stuff. Hopefully a coincidence, or whatever you want to call it, is what he said. Now, just to run through a quick timeline, of course, we all know that Operation Epic Fury began in Iran on the 20th of February. Trump's orders, they struck targets to what they said was dismantle the Iranian regime's security apparatus. Israeli officials then told the US that Khamenei had been killed in the opening strikes, and that the operation triggered Iranian retaliation across the Middle East. Then we have had the 2-week conditional ceasefire negotiated through Pakistan, with Iran committing to open the Strait of Hormuz. We'll be talking about that a little bit later, in exchange for suspension of US strikes. That ceasefire window was supposed to expire today, but as Vanessa's already mentioned, that seems to have been extended until the so-called negotiations complete. And then the scientist story broke into the mainstream White House briefings on the 15th and 16th of April. And then FBI Director Patel confirmed to Fox News on Sunday that there would be an investigation. And then on Monday, Comer and his colleague Burleson issued a letter which demanding the agency briefings by the 27th of April. So the story is absolutely being elevated to maximum visibility just at the time the ceasefire was due to expire. Now, Trump has announced, as I say, that the ceasefire will be extended to the conclusion of the negotiations, but this all feeds into the war narrative. And it's something that we should be absolutely aware of, particularly since COVID, is how politicians and the mainstream media make the normal seem abnormal. And that is, I believe, exactly what's going on here, Charles.
Absolutely, yeah. Do scientists get bird flu?
That's a very good question. But anyway, let's move on then, and continuing with war, the continuing fail on this topic.
It is looking increasingly hard to cover up the hard reality. We've had many a hollow gesture over the last, forever actually, but from the coalition of the willing, we're now staggering alongside France into something that is described as being a multinational force. Actually, I'm not sure the word force is even used. Perhaps they really decided against that in terms of reality. But we've had a rehash of what was described as happening at the Permanent Joint Headquarters the other day. And there was, as I say, this statement put out by the government. Sorry, if we can just have that back on screen, because I quote, military planners from over 30 nations will advance detailed planning to reopen the Strait of Hormuz in a 2-day UK-hosted conference. The work is part of a UK and French leadership of a multinational coalition to reopen the Strait. So not force, it's a coalition. And they go on to say that the sessions will advance military plans to reopen the Strait as soon as conditions permit, following a sustainable ceasefire agreement. Now, I've put that in bold because it just goes to show that this entire thing is completely conditional upon the actions of other countries, most notably the United States and Israel. And of course, there's absolutely no reference to either of those countries in this statement. Now, on this specific issue, or at least the shenanigans going on around the Strait, Mike has rather more.
Well, it's really a bit more about that, actually, because as you say, 30 nations getting together today to plan how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, as if they are going to be able to do that anyway. The talks taking place, as Charles said, at UK's permanent joint headquarters at Northwood. Now, this work is part of the UK and French, this is how they describe it, leadership of a multinational coalition to reopen the Strait. The sessions will advance military plans to reopen the Strait as soon as conditions permit. Does that mean when there's nobody there to shoot at them or something? Is that,
well, when somebody else has done all the work for them.
Yeah, okay.
How are they going to influence that?
And it's going to build on progress made last week when Starmer was over in Paris to meet the 51 countries. Now, at the Paris summit, they called for the unconditional, unrestricted and immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and confirmed the establishment of an independent and strictly defensive multinational mission to protect merchant vessels, reassure commercial shipping operators and conduct mine clearance operations. And the UK and France are working to ensure that the military plan involves as many partners as possible and brings the expertise of each nation together in support of our shared interests. But this is, I believe, Charles, about getting the Europeans together. This is efforts to bolster that sort of, or put pressure on them to develop their military capabilities, which they don't still have.
Exactly, yes. So smoke and mirrors, absolutely no way of delivering any sort of an effect.
Right.
But plenty of talk, which I doubt can be followed up with any sort of action at all. And this rather sums up the whole attitude of government. And by coincidence, I found a picture on Twitter of Keir Starmer and John Healey visiting submariners the other day, and it just seemed to sort of sum the situation up, really, which was them sort of waving off a rather rusty-looking submarine, which is presumably undermanned, and you can almost imagine them just saying, "Right, yeah, see you later, good luck," as they pack them off to a totally uncertain future. And this is kind of reinforced by reports that are coming out, admittedly hearsay, but the Telegraph here reporting about Special Forces disgruntlement and indeed resignations over what's described as war crime witch hunts. Now, they specifically cite D Squadron and G Squadron 22 SAS, and it seems impossible to ignore the coincidence with the recent arrest of Ben Roberts-Smith, the highly decorated former Australian soldier of the Australian SAS, arrested indeed for war crimes, as though this has caused concern on this side of the equator. Now, the Daily Mail has more on this with specific regard to the SAS Regimental Association, which is reckoned to have put out a communication to its members, which read that there are currently 242 Special Forces Group personnel who've been issued with Section 9s for Northern Ireland, Afghanistan, Syria legacy investigations. Not all are accused. It's a mixture of accused and witnesses. You can't chin them off, I'm afraid. If the Rule 9 is refused, then a Section 21 is enacted. Serious stuff, I'm afraid. Now, the specific details of which rule means what is sort of neither here nor there. But the point is that there are an awful lot of people, both serving and formerly serving in Special Forces, who are now under investigation and therefore feeling that they are not in any way protected by the government. And of course, that could leave significant void in the Special Forces capability at a time when the government is talking up being able to use armed forces to counter the threats apparently from Russia and of course now Iran. Now, at the same time as this, there is a report in the Express that the Ministry of Defence has lost track of at least 95,000 people described as being fit and willing veterans for urgent recall. Now, this relates directly to the Armed Forces Bill, which, of course, is making provisions as it runs through Parliament now to be able to recall veterans on a much wider scope than had been done before. And, of course, another very significant clause in that bill is that once people are on the books as a reservist, there is a channel opened up to put them into full-time service from that reserve capability. So that's absolutely one to watch. On things to watch, George Robertson is the person who's quoted, Lord Robertson, who's one of the lead author actually of this Strategic Defence Review from last year. It was he that was quoted as having said that the Ministry of Defence had lost track of all these people. Of course, ironic, given that they just rolled out the Veterans Digital ID card, which was absolutely meant to be able to track and gather data on the 2.2 million veterans in the country. We'll just listen to what Robertson said recently about the state of the armed forces and what should be done.
There is a corrosive complacency today in Britain's political leadership. Lip service is paid to the risks, the threats, the bright red signals of danger. But even the promised national conversation about defence can't be started. The cold reality of today's dangerous world is that we cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget. An all-of-country approach to defence is the only way to ensure that we are resilient against the kind of attack that we face at the moment, and to prevent those that we might face in the future. The threats are no longer theoretical, nor are they distant from our shores. What Iran has shown in the Middle East, and what the wanton violence of the Russian occupation in eastern Ukraine illustrates in technicolor, is what we face in today's world of war.
No, I think what he's really saying there is that in order to get a grip of the threat that he has writ large through the Strategic Defence Review, that is an existential one posed by Russia, we are going to need conscription and emergency measures of some sort. Now, slightly oblique, but I think very much related. We look to Japan, which has just after many decades, in fact, since the Second World War, changed its policy on exporting what's described as being defence equipment. And I consider that this is very significant in light of the fact that the Ministry of Defence in Japan has as effectively the main part of its website, the Japan-US alliance. Given the action taken by the United States and Israel at the moment, it really cannot be ignored, what is the apparent coincidence between Japan changing its policy and indeed what's going on with its alliance and the actions of the United States, I think cannot be ignored. And that will be, again, one to watch.
Indeed, thank you for that. Vanessa, let's come back to you then. And what's the latest in terms of the regime change in Syria?
Well, yeah, people tend to forget the disaster that is left behind in the countries that have been targeted and where the West and Israel have been successful in securing regime change like Syria, Libya, Iraq, and so on. And so I don't really want that to happen because Syrians continue to suffer. There is mass poverty. Electricity is worse than it was when I was there, despite some of the propaganda reports coming through in the West from the Al-Qaeda regime. There is mass starvation, mass unemployment, mass insecurity, lawlessness. There are murders on a daily basis, rapes, abductions, and so on. And this is across the board now, targeting not only ethnic minorities, but also even Sunni Muslim individuals. And there is just basically consistently crime in almost every city of Syria. And this is an article basically published, I think, yesterday in the New York Times. Syrian billionaires needed a favor in Washington, and they invoked the Trump name. Now, what is this about? I'm talking here really about Syrians in diaspora. So not only this particularly wealthy family, but individuals in diaspora funded by the United States Department, individuals who, despite not intending to ever return to Syria since the regime change, because of course it's unlivable in, and they prefer to stay in the West, but who nevertheless, through the 14 years of war, called for regime change, called for sanctions, called for a no-fly zone, and called for the collective punishment of their own people. And so in this article, what it basically says is last summer, Representative Joe Wilson, a Republican of South Carolina who visited Syria many times in the last 2 years before the fall, sat in his Capitol Hill office in rapt attention as Middle Eastern investors laid out their plans in a video to develop coastal property in Syria, a cruise ship port, a polo club, a Bugatti car showroom, a world-class golf course, all in a country that had just recently been torn apart. I had crossed that out, thank you, by civil war, because of course it wasn't a civil war, it was effectively an MI6, CIA, Mossad, Turkish MIT regime change war. Now, this family, the Al-Khayat family, the entire family who were living in diaspora in Doha and Qatar. Qatar, of course, bankrolled both the media and the actual Al-Qaeda elements in Syria to the tune of billions, effectively now are coming back, typical predator capitalists, to come back and benefit from the destruction of the country, to invest and to build the country in the way that they want to see it, which is effectively to win 12 billion in regime-sponsored contracts to rebuild. And they effectively lobbied Trump to lift the sanctions. And Joe Wilson told them, well, the best way to do this, of course, is to offer Trump a golf course in his name in Syria. And one of the Al-Khayat brothers replied saying, oh, I've already done that. We've already labeled a resort that I'm planning to build as the Trump XYZ resort. So under Trump, what we're seeing, of course, is this kind of crony capitalism on steroids, where these investors, many of whom are running shell companies, facade companies, which means that the billions that are coming in are going to disappear. They're certainly not going to improve the living conditions or security of the Syrian people. And then I wanted to pull this up. This was published yesterday by one of the channels that basically promotes Jolani propaganda. The Damascus Governorate and the Ministry of Tourism launched the Kashoun Journey project during a ceremony in Damascus. Once a former regime military site, only during the war, I hasten to add, Mount Kashoun is being transformed into a tourism destination aimed at boosting the economy and creating thousands of jobs through local Syrian expertise. Key features include the promenade, Bridge of Memories overlooking Damascus, Kashoun Wings, accommodation, the Kingdom of Bees restaurant, an amphitheater, and a cable car. Now, I can guarantee that not one of the actual population of Syria is going to be able to afford to go to this area. And I wanted to make a personal comment here, because this is a photo that I took about 3 years ago when I visited this area. It's one of the most stunning areas in Damascus, but also historically one of the most important. Here you can actually visit the cave where Cain killed Abel, according to the history of Syria, and whose blood stained the mountain red from the base up to the peak. And apparently the legend goes that the mountain shook with horror at the horrific crime that was committed by Cain. And the angel Gabriel put his hand in the cave, and you can still to today see the handprint in the roof of this cave. It's also the shrine of the 40 saints. So it's an area of great historic significance and pilgrimage. And yet we're seeing, if we move on to the next image, this is what it's going to look like, which just reminds me of something. People might go, oh, look, that looks amazing. But I can guarantee you that a room or a table in the restaurant or the hotel is going to be well beyond the capability of the majority of the Syrian population. And it will be an attraction for those in Syrians in diaspora who will now come back, and also for the Saudis, the Qataris, and the UAE alliance that enabled the regime change war in the first place. And then finally, I also just wanted to mention this. This is what we so often see post-regime change. The Jolani regime eyes full privatization of public health. Again, my experience through the 10 years that I was working in Syria and living in Syria for 5 of those years, the health service was unbelievable despite the effects of economic sanctions and the war itself. they're trying to sell it in one of the articles, again, very much affiliated to the Jolani regime. If we can have the next slide up. Rather than being privatization, it's a partnership plan between the public and private sector. But I think we all know what that means, having seen it with the NHS in the UK. So again, I refer people to this article that I wrote a while ago about the Syria being prey to the globalist cabal and crony capitalist al-Qaeda regime, very similar to what happened in Iraq after the 2003 war. Horrifying for me to see Syria plunged into this kind of depraved era.
Yes, thank you for that report, Vanessa. Thank you very much. Now let's move back to Plymouth now and Plymouth Live. And this article is an opinion piece. Now it says US B-1 bombers flying over Plymouth is not normal. Now this is by Tony Staunton, who's he's a member of CND, but he's a trade unionist mainly. And I just wanted to run through. I've just put that the full slide back on there, please, Chris. We'll just want to run through some of the quotes from this just very briefly. He said, B-1 bomber is filmed high in the sky over Plymouth. Its rumblings, distinct from rolling thunder, cause us to look skywards to question and to assess. It's not normal, not a usual sound. Britain is an aircraft carrier for the United States, he says. Not only those who are comfortable with this special relationship applaud the US bases strewn across our island and the use of the Royal Air Force for Trump's illegal war in Iran, just as Blair and Bush's invasion of Iraq in 2003 is now recognized as illegal under international law, so will the bombing of Iran in 2026. There are no weapons of mass destruction, no nuclear weapons in Iran. The illegal invasion is costing the US $891 million each day, and the global economy hundreds of billions in disruption, transport and agriculture descending into chaos. By the end of this week, roughly 60,000 American service members will be in the Middle East, the largest concentration since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. On Saturday, we're protesting at RAF Fairford to demand the UK stops the bombers, kick the US nuclear weapons off British soil, fund nurses, not nukes, vote for welfare, not warfare. Now, I have to say I have a lot of sympathy with a lot of the comments in that opinion piece, Charles. What I thought was a little bit disappointing was the determination to politicize it, because that wasn't the only political comment that was made in the article, which, of course, then divides people because he's busy criticizing, right-wing politics and so on. Then that's going to convince right-wing people of right-wing mind not to go to the protest on Saturday. I think this is something that everybody needs to be protesting, and we need to set this political aspect of this aside.
I agree, but I think it is a feature of almost all protest, which just looks anything but organic these days, because there is always a protest and a counter-protest, ensuring that, in effect, they cancel each other out and the beliefs of either side are lost in the chaos. And in fact, that's exactly what happened at Fairford when there was a sort of moderate protest some weeks ago. There was a sort of pro-peace element, and then a kind of back our, but sort of back our boys, oddly protect Israel.
Yes.
So, yes, very complicated.
Okay, and related in a sense then is this report from the John Smith Centre, Glasgow University. So half of young people are wisely suggesting that they would never take up arms for the UK, according to a poll run by the John Smith Centre. This is a poll of 2016 to 29-year-olds, sponsored by Nationwide. It shows that those who say they expect their lives to be better than their parents has halved in a year, from 63% to 36%. The poll also finds that only 25% of young people feel they're being treated fairly by the political system, and 50% say there are no circumstances under which they would take up arms for the UK. They're mainly concerned about the impact of AI on jobs, but asked which political leader best represents British values, 45% failed to name any current leader, saying either none of the above or that they just don't know. Now, the quote that's doing the rounds on mainstream media coverage of this is from Eddie Barnes, who's a director of the John Smith Centre, who said that bearing in mind the economic realities young people face. Quotes, it should be little surprise that 50% say they wouldn't fight for the country under any circumstances, or as many young people might put it, why fight for a country that isn't fighting for you? Now, asked to rank the main issues affecting the UK today, young people, the top 5 in descending order were inflation, the cost of living, housing affordability, healthcare, immigration and asylum, and jobs and job security. Since last year, then, young people have moved slightly leftwards politically, then apparently. So 22% now place themselves on the left. That's up from 17% last year. And the proportion of younger people identifying with the right has fallen from 20% to 15% in this survey. And then on geopolitics, the survey says that young people believe the UK has some responsibility to intervene overseas, particularly in cases of human rights abuses. So still clearly a lot of information to be given over there, and a lot of communication still to happen. And they're still open to reparations with former colonies, with 66% saying yes or maybe. So there's a lot in that report, and I do recommend people read it, but at least people are not prepared to take up arms at this stage with the current regime that we have in this country.
Not for now. And I think this is something we've talked about a lot, is that there may be a threshold. We're not there yet. And this is why we talk repeatedly about the idea that there could be an emergency which would, open the floodgates to exactly that sort of thing, a false flag attack on UK soil being the most obvious. I assume we're meant to infer ignorance on that statistic about not being able to identify leaders, rather than it being a reflection of them not actually identifying any of those people there as being leaders.
No, I think it was more to do with the fact that they thought that the people that were running the country were
leaders.
idiots, basically.
Good.
That was basically it.
No, that's fine, as long as that's what's drawn out of it.
But we can talk more about this in extra. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes on the live stream if you're a UK Column member. So stick around and join us for extra. Otherwise, watch Jerm and Carl tonight, and Brian and Charles tomorrow for Military Matters. We'll be back at 1 p.m. as usual on Friday for another news program. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.